The little black girl hid beside a vending machine as someone whispered her name across the empty corridor. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. It was an ordinary day that would quickly spiral into something terrifying. A little girl, no more than 8 or 9, found herself in the midst of an empty building, her heart racing. She had been walking down the long, quiet corridor when she heard it, the soft whisper of her name, barely audible, but unmistakable. It chilled her to the core. There was no one else around. She froze, her tiny body shaking in fear. She knew she needed to hide, but where? Her eyes darted around the hallway, scanning for safety. That's when she saw it, a vending machine tucked in the corner. Without thinking, she rushed to it, crouching behind it, praying that whoever was calling her name wouldn't find her. Her mind raced. She didn't know what was happening or why someone was whispering her name in such a cold, eerie way. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The hallway felt like it was closing in on her. She had to be quiet, stay still, and hope that the person wouldn't notice her hiding. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as though the stranger knew she was close. Every second felt like an eternity. The silence of the empty building made everything feel more sinister. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps echoing down the hallway. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to stay as still as possible, hoping the shadow of the vending machine would keep her hidden. She could barely hear the footsteps now, and her heart beat faster, louder in her chest. Was it the person who had whispered her name? She didn't dare move or make a sound. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. She held her breath, trying to make herself as small as possible. It felt like time stood still, like the air around her had frozen. Then, as if the universe had decided it was time for her to face whatever was out there, a figure appeared in the hallway just in front of the vending machine. The girl's eyes went wide with terror as she stared at the figure, tall, dark, and cloaked in shadow. She couldn't make out their face, but the presence felt overwhelming. She clenched her fists, ready to run if she needed to, but her legs felt paralyzed. She was trapped, her mind screaming for a way out. The figure didn't move, just stood there, seemingly watching her. The tension was unbearable. She could almost feel their eyes on her, like they were seeing right through the machine and into her soul. But then, without warning, the figure stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. She let out a shaky breath, still too scared to move. What had just happened? Who was that? What did they want with her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of another voice, this time from the direction of the stairwell. It was deep, familiar, and calm. Are you all right? The voice asked, its warmth cutting through the cold tension in the air. It was the voice of someone she knew, someone who had always been there for her. She didn't know if she could trust the voice or if it was just another trick. But in that moment, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Help had arrived, and maybe, just maybe, she would be safe. The silence in the hallway felt like an eternity. The girl's heart was racing, her tiny hands trembling behind the vending machine. She had no idea how long she had been crouching there, but it felt like hours. Every second she remained hidden, the fear clawed at her, growing more suffocating. She could still hear that whisper, faint but unmistakable, echoing in her mind. The footsteps that had once been so close were now gone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Just when she thought she might lose her nerve, she heard the voice again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right in front of her. Are you all right? The voice was calm, steady, but there was a hint of concern. It wasn't the cold whisper that had chilled her spine moments ago. No, this voice was different. This was someone who cared. Slowly, cautiously, she peeked around the edge of the vending machine. Her eyes widened as she saw the figure standing there. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the dim light from the hallway. He was dressed in a black leather jacket, and his presence was strong, commanding. He looked like someone who knew exactly what to do in a situation like this. For a moment, the girl froze, unsure of whether to trust him. But there was something in his posture, something in his demeanor, that told her he was there to help. Without thinking, she took a tentative step forward, her feet feeling heavier than they should have been. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man took a step toward her, lowering himself to her level, his eyes softening as he saw the fear in hers. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm here to help you." The girl felt her throat tighten, the fear still lingering in her chest, but now there was a glimmer of hope, a tiny flicker of safety in his words. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to do next. The man extended a hand toward her. "Come with me. You're safe now," he said. Without hesitating, she took his hand. His grip was firm, but there was a kindness in it that made her feel like she could trust him. He led her down the hallway, his footsteps steady and sure. As they moved, she could feel the tension in her body begin to ease, though the fear still clung to her. She had no idea where they were going, but she had a feeling that wherever it was, it would be better than where she had been. They reached a door at the end of the hallway. The man opened it slowly, revealing a small office with a desk and a few chairs. He motioned for her to sit in one of the chairs, and she did so, hesitantly. He sat across from her, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the tear stains on her cheeks and the dirt on her clothes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The girl hesitated, her mind racing to make sense of everything that had happened. I don't know. Someone was following me, whispering my name. I was so scared," she said, her voice trembling as she spoke. The man nodded, his expression serious. "You did the right thing by hiding. You're safe now." But just as she was starting to feel a little more at ease, the door to the office creaked open. A new figure appeared in the doorway. The man's expression immediately shifted to one of caution, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the newcomer. The girl instinctively shrank back in her seat, feeling a new wave of fear rise up within her. The new figure was a woman, dressed in a sharp black suit, her eyes scanning the room with a quick, calculating gaze. "We need to get her out of here," the woman said, her voice cold and authoritative. The man stood up, his posture tense. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. The woman turned to him, her gaze unyielding. "The situation's more complicated than we thought. We're not safe here anymore." The girl looked between them, confused. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The woman's gaze softened slightly as she looked at the girl. "There's someone after you. Someone dangerous. We need to get you to a safe place." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who could be after her or why, but the fear that had been gnawing at her deepened. Who's after me?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the man's. "We don't have time to explain everything. We need to move, now." The man turned back to the girl, his expression softening again. "Don't worry. You're going to be okay. Just trust me, all right?" The girl nodded, though the fear still bubbled up in her chest. She wasn't sure who these people were, but they seemed to know what they were doing. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she wasn't completely alone in this strange, terrifying world. The room felt colder now. The girl sat there, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on her chest. She had barely wrapped her mind around what was happening when the man and woman exchanged another tense look. The woman, whose sharp gaze had never left the girl, turned to the man. "We need to move her now," she said, her voice cold and firm. The man nodded, his face tight with concern, but his posture remained calm. He turned back to the girl, kneeling down so they were eye level. "We're going to get you out of here, all right?" he said, his voice low and reassuring. The girl nodded, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to make of the situation, but one thing was clear: she wasn't safe. The woman stepped forward, her movements precise and measured. She pulled out her phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences. "Get the van ready. We'll need backup on the route. No mistakes." The girl's mind raced. Who were these people? Why was she being moved? What was really going on? She wanted to ask, but the words caught in her throat. Everything felt so overwhelming, like she had been pulled into something much bigger than herself. The man seemed to notice her hesitation. "We'll explain everything once we're safe," he said gently, as if sensing the storm of questions in her mind. She nodded again, though she still felt uncertain. The woman finished her call and turned to the man. "We're leaving in 5 minutes. No time to waste." The man stood, his eyes scanning the room. "All right. Stay close," he told the girl. "You're coming with me." The girl's mind raced as they made their way to the door. The moment they stepped into the hallway, the silence felt different, more oppressive, more dangerous. She could hear every step they took echoing off the walls, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. They moved quickly but quietly, the girl clinging to the man's side like a lifeline. Her small hand barely grasped the edge of his jacket, but it felt like everything. They reached a stairwell and descended quickly, the soft shuffle of their feet the only sound in the otherwise silent building. The girl's stomach twisted in knots. Was someone still following them? Had they been seen? Every little noise made her jump. Every shadow seemed to loom larger. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the woman was waiting for them by the door. Her eyes flicked over to the girl. "Stay behind us," she instructed, her voice sharp but calm. The girl nodded, too scared to say anything. They hurried through the door and out into the night. The cool air hit the girl's face, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of relief. But that was quickly replaced by a growing fear. Outside, the parking lot was dimly lit by flickering streetlights. The van was already waiting, the engine running. The man ushered her toward it. The woman was already in the driver's seat, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if looking for something or someone. The girl climbed into the back of the van, the man following her. As the door slammed shut behind them, the van lurched forward. The girl could barely see anything through the tinted windows, but she could feel the movement, feel the van picking up speed. The man sat next to her, his face still grim. "We're just taking a detour," he said, trying to reassure her, though his tone carried a weight that made her heart race even more. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small, barely audible. The man looked at her, his expression softening. "Somewhere safe." That was all he said. The van sped through the empty streets, the city's lights fading in the distance as they drove deeper into the unknown. The girl tried to process everything, but it felt like her thoughts were scattered, like she couldn't focus. What had she gotten herself into? What was happening to her? Why was she being taken away in the middle of the night? And most of all, who was whispering her name in the dark? The questions spun in her mind, but she couldn't find the answers. The man beside her remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She wanted to ask him again, to beg him for some sort of explanation, but something told her it wasn't the right time. She had to trust him, for now. The van took another turn, and the sound of the tires on the road seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Time felt like it was stretching, like they had been driving for hours, though she knew it had only been minutes. The fear never left her, but now, she was beginning to feel something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe there were people who would protect her. She glanced at the man again, seeing the way he clenched his jaw, the determination in his eyes. He was serious about keeping her safe. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. She couldn't explain why, but in that moment, she believed him. They drove on through the night, the city lights shrinking in the distance, leaving behind a world she didn't recognize. And ahead of them was a place where she would find safety. Or so she hoped. The van's tires hummed steadily against the asphalt as it sped down the empty highway. The girl sat in silence, her eyes locked on the faint glow of the dashboard. The man beside her hadn't said much since they left the city, and she could feel the tension building between them, like a weight that refused to be lifted. She wasn't sure where they were going, but it didn't matter anymore. She had no choice but to trust them. Her hand gripped the worn fabric of the seat, her knuckles white, and her heart beat loudly in her chest. Despite the man's reassurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The world outside the van seemed to blur by, and every shadow that passed by felt like it was hiding something. She glanced at the man again, his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed forward. He had barely spoken a word since the woman had finished her call and told them to get in the van. He had that determined look again, like he wasn't about to let anything stand in their way. She wanted to ask him questions, about who was after her, about why all of this was happening, but something stopped her. It wasn't the time. She needed to stay quiet, stay out of the way. But she couldn't silence the questions in her mind. Why had they targeted her? Why was someone whispering her name in the dark? The van continued to drive, the miles stretching on. She felt the weight of the uncertainty in her gut. Then, as if on cue, the man spoke. "We're almost there," he said, his voice calm but low. She turned to him, surprised. "Where's there?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't look at her when he answered, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. A place where you'll be safe, he said, his tone carrying an air of finality. The girl didn't ask any more questions. She didn't know what to expect, but somehow she believed him. The road began to curve, and the scenery outside shifted. The dark city lights were replaced by the deep shadows of trees, and the quiet hum of the van seemed to take on a different tone, more urgent, like they were nearing something important. As the van took another sharp turn, the girl saw the first signs of a building in the distance. Her stomach tightened. Was this the safe place? Was she going to be okay here? The van slowed, turning into a gravel driveway. The headlights illuminated the house up ahead. It was an old, weathered building, nestled among tall trees, and the outside looked like it had been there for years. The front porch was empty, and the windows were dark. It wasn't what she had expected, but then again, she didn't really know what she had been expecting. The van stopped in front of the house, and the woman quickly exited the vehicle, her steps brisk and purposeful. The man followed her, and then he turned back to the girl. "Stay here. We'll be right back," he said. The girl nodded, too exhausted to protest. She watched them walk toward the door, their movements sharp and deliberate. She was left alone in the van, the engine's hum fading into silence. The uncertainty, once heavy, now pressed down on her like a physical weight. She wanted to ask if this place was really safe, if she could trust the man and the woman, but no one was there to answer. The quiet was oppressive, and she could feel her heart racing again. She glanced out the window, staring at the dark trees that surrounded the house. Her mind spun with questions, but the night was too still, too silent to offer any answers. The minutes dragged by. She tried to focus on her breathing, to keep herself calm, but the isolation was overwhelming. She felt small, helpless. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The door to the house creaked open, and the woman reappeared. Believed her, but there was a part of her that wanted to. She nodded slowly, still uncertain. The woman opened the door, gesturing for her to get out. "Come on," she said, her voice softening. "It's time to come inside." The girl hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the van, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. She followed the woman toward the house, the man already waiting at the door, his arms crossed. The air was cold now, and the house loomed in front of her, its dark windows watching her every step. As they entered, the door shut behind them with a heavy thud, sealing her inside. She felt the weight of the night settle over her again. But this time, it was different. She was here now. Safe, maybe. But was it truly safe? She didn't know. The man's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he spoke with a sense of urgency. "You're not out of danger yet. Stay close." The girl swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like someone was looking out for her. For now, that was enough. The house was eerily quiet as the girl stood inside, her heart still racing. The door had shut behind her with a heavy thud, leaving her in a dimly lit entryway. The air felt thick with tension, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The man and woman led her further into the house, their footsteps steady, purposeful. She followed them without a word, unsure of what to expect next. The walls were lined with dark wood, and the faint smell of old furniture lingered in the air. It was a stark contrast to the sterile feeling of the hallway she had just left. The house felt old, lived in, and yet something about it still felt disconnected. The woman led them through a narrow hallway to a small living room. The furniture was simple but cozy, dark leather couches, a few tables, and a single lamp that cast a soft glow over the room. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It felt safer than the cold hallways outside. The man motioned for her to sit on the couch, and she did so hesitantly, her eyes darting around the room. She could feel the man watching her closely, as if waiting for something. She couldn't help but wonder what they really wanted from her. What was going to happen next? The woman went to the small kitchen area, her movements quick and efficient. She returned moments later with a glass of water and a blanket, handing both to the girl. "Drink this," she said softly, her tone surprisingly gentle. The girl accepted the water gratefully, her hands trembling slightly as she took a sip. It was cool, refreshing, and for a moment, it helped ease the tightness in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small. The woman nodded but didn't speak. The man, however, stood by the window, his back to her, watching the street outside. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice low. "I know you have questions, but now is not the time." The girl stared at him, her mind racing with all the things she wanted to ask. Who was after her? Why had they been following her? But she didn't ask. Not yet. She was still too afraid, too uncertain. "We'll keep you safe," the man continued, turning to face her. His eyes were sharp, intense, but there was a warmth there, too, something that made her want to believe him. "But you need to stay here, stay quiet, until we figure out what's really going on." The girl nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy blanket. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want to go anywhere else. Not yet. She wasn't ready to leave this strange, safe place just yet. The woman set the blanket over her shoulders and sat down beside her. She looked at the girl, her expression softening. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We'll protect you." The girl felt the tears well up again, but she fought them back. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to be weak. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why is this happening?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand gently on the girl's arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't need to know everything right now," the woman said, her voice calm. "You just need to trust us. Trust that we'll do everything we can to keep you safe." The girl bit her lip, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. She wanted answers, wanted to understand why this was happening, why she was suddenly thrown into a world of shadows and secrets. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't have the luxury of answers right now. She had to survive. She had to hold on, even if she didn't understand the bigger picture. The man stepped closer to them, his gaze sharp. "We'll be checking in with some people soon," he said. "We need to know who's behind this. We need to know what we're up against." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Are you going after them?" she asked quietly. He nodded, his face hardening. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect you." The girl felt a shiver run through her. She couldn't imagine what they might be up against, what kind of people were chasing her. But she could feel the determination in the man's words. She believed him. The woman stood up, moving to the small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer, pulling out a small phone. "I'm going to make some calls," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'll be right back." The man watched her for a moment before turning back to the girl. "You're safe here," he said again, his voice softer now. "Just stay here. Don't leave the room. We'll be back soon." The girl nodded again, though her mind was still swirling. She had so many questions, so many things she didn't understand. But for now, she had to trust them. She had to believe that they were doing everything they could to protect her. As the woman left the room, the man stood by the window once again, his eyes scanning the street outside. The girl watched him for a moment, feeling the tension in the room grow. What was going to happen next? Would she be safe here? Or was danger lurking just around the corner? She didn't know. But for now, all she could do was wait. The quiet was suffocating. The girl sat alone in the room, the sounds of the house outside almost too loud in contrast to the silence she felt within. She kept her eyes on the door, waiting for the man and woman to return, though part of her wondered if she should be worried. What was happening out there? She tried to push the thoughts aside, but her mind was restless, constantly replaying the events of the past few hours. The soft creak of the floorboards outside the door made her jump. She held her breath, her heart beating loudly in her chest. The door opened slowly, and the man stepped inside. He looked at her for a moment before closing the door behind him. His expression was unreadable, but his posture remained calm, controlled. "You're all right," he said, his voice steady. The girl nodded, though she still felt a little unsure. "What's going on?" she asked softly. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. The house was still, but something in his gaze made her nervous. "It's not over," he finally said, his voice low. The girl felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. He turned to face her, his expression hardening. "There are people out there who want to find you. They'll stop at nothing." His words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking deep into her stomach. She didn't know who these people were, or why they were after her, but the fear that had been growing inside her intensified. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "Who are they?" she whispered. The man shook his head. "We don't know yet, but we're doing everything we can to find out." There was a moment of silence. And then the woman entered the room. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the man. "We have a problem," she said, her voice clipped. The man's expression tightened, and he turned to her. "What happened?" The woman stepped forward, her eyes flicking to the girl before returning to the man. "We've been compromised," she said, her voice low. "They're closer than we thought." The girl's heart skipped a beat. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man walked over to the woman, his face serious. "It means we don't have much time. We need to move now." The girl's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman turned to her, her expression softening slightly. "Don't worry," she said, her tone reassuring. "We're not going to let anything happen to you." The girl nodded, but her stomach twisted. She had so many questions, but there was no time for answers. She could see the urgency in their eyes, the way they moved with purpose as they prepared to leave the room. The man grabbed his jacket and gestured for her to follow. "Come on," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It's time." She stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew she couldn't stay behind. The woman moved quickly ahead, leading the way as the man followed close behind. The girl felt the weight of their presence, the tension in the air thickening as they moved through the house. They reached the door, and the man opened it, peering out into the darkness. The woman stepped outside first, followed by the man, and then the girl. The air was cool, the night still. They moved quickly toward a car parked at the end of the driveway, the headlights flicking on as they approached. The girl got in the back seat, her heart pounding in her chest. The man and woman climbed into the front, and the car started moving, driving quickly down the dark road. The girl looked out the window, her mind racing. Where were they going? What was going to happen next? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into something she didn't understand. The car sped through the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness. They didn't speak as they drove, the only sound the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of the tires on the road. The girl sat in silence, her thoughts swirling. She had never felt so alone, so small. She wanted to ask where they were taking her, but the words caught in her throat. She felt as if everything she had known before was slipping away, like she was being swept into a new world she didn't belong to. The car took a sharp turn, the tires screeching as they moved down a winding road. The girl's grip tightened on the seat, her stomach flipping as the car picked up speed. She had no idea where they were going, but she knew one thing. It wasn't going to be easy. The night stretched on, the stars above shining faintly in the sky, and the girl could only wonder what was coming next. But she wasn't alone anymore. She was with them. And for now, that was enough. The car continued to move through the night, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The girl sat quietly in the back, her mind still racing. The road ahead was long and unfamiliar, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading deeper into something dangerous. Her hands were tightly gripping the edge of the seat, her knuckles white from the tension. The man and woman in the front seat were silent, their eyes focused on the road, the faint glow of the dashboard illuminating their faces. Every so often, the woman would glance in the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable. The girl wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the unknown was pressing down on her chest, and she couldn't shake the sense of unease that was growing inside her. They had promised to keep her safe, but from what? Who was after her? And why? The car swerved onto a narrow road, the trees on either side pressing in close. The headlights barely illuminated the path ahead, and the girl felt her stomach twist in fear. Where were they going? What was waiting for her at the end of this road? She looked out the window, the darkness outside feeling endless, as if there was no escape. The woman in the front seat broke the silence. "We'll be there soon," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You need to stay alert. Things might get complicated from here on out." The girl nodded, though she wasn't sure what that meant. Complicated? What did she mean by that? She wanted to ask, but again, the words caught in her throat. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and she pressed her palm against the seat to steady herself. The car continued to wind its way through the dark forest, the occasional flash of a distant light breaking up the darkness. The air outside felt thick, and the girl's breath fogged up the window as she stared out into the night. She had no idea where they were going, but part of her hoped they would find a place where she could finally feel safe. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed to a stop. The woman in the front seat glanced over her shoulder. Stay in the car, she instructed, her tone serious. We'll check it out first. The girl nodded, though her fear was growing. She didn't want to stay in the car alone. She wanted to know what was going on. The man got out first, followed by the woman. The girl watched through the window as they moved toward a small building in the distance. It looked like a cabin, surrounded by trees. There were no lights on, and the air around it seemed unnervingly still. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she watched them approach. Were they really safe here? The man and woman disappeared inside the cabin, leaving the girl alone in the car. The silence that followed was deafening. The girl's mind raced with questions, with fears, and with thoughts she couldn't process. Was this the place they had promised would be safe? Or was it just another stop on a journey she didn't understand? She felt the car shift as someone leaned against it, and she looked up quickly. The man was back, his face serious but not angry. He opened the door and slid in next to her, his eyes scanning the road behind them before looking at her. It's safe for now, he said, his voice low. But we have to keep moving. There's no time to waste. The girl nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest. She didn't understand why they couldn't just stay here, why they couldn't rest. But she knew better than to question him. He had promised to keep her safe, and for now, that was enough. The woman returned to the car, her face unreadable. We need to go, she said simply. The man started the engine, and the car slowly pulled away from the cabin. The girl glanced back one last time, watching the small building fade into the distance. The sense of fear in her chest hadn't gone away, but now, she had something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she was closer to finding the safety they had promised her. But even as they drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting for them, just around the corner. The road stretched ahead, winding through the trees, and all she could do was hold on and trust them. The girl had no choice but to keep going. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that the only thing she could control was her own survival. And for now, that was enough. The car continued down the winding road, its tires crunching against the gravel. The girl sat quietly in the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the sound of the engine humming steadily. The man and the woman in the front seats were quiet, too. She could feel the tension between them, like a thick fog that wouldn't lift. Her mind raced with questions, but she didn't ask. There was no point in asking anymore. She already knew they were keeping something from her. The girl glanced out the window, trying to focus on the landscape passing by, but the trees and shadows seemed to blur together. They had been driving for what felt like hours, and yet, they were still nowhere near whatever destination they were headed for. She couldn't even tell if they were getting closer to safety or further away from it. Every time the car swerved, every time they made another turn, her heart skipped a beat. Was this just another stop on the run, or was something worse waiting for them? She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. There was no way to prepare for what might happen next. The woman in the front seat glanced at the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting the girl's. You okay? She asked, her voice soft but stern. The girl nodded quickly, her throat dry. I'm fine, she said, her voice sounding foreign even to her own ears. She wasn't fine. She was terrified, but she didn't know how to say it. You've been through a lot, the woman said, her tone softening just a little. I know this is hard, but we're getting you out of here. You just need to trust us for a little longer. The girl nodded again, though her mind was screaming for answers. Trust them? How could she trust anyone when she didn't even know who they were running from, or why they were keeping her in the dark? The man in the driver's seat glanced at the woman before focusing back on the road. We're almost there, he said, his voice low. But we need to be careful. This isn't over yet. The girl's stomach twisted. She had no idea what was happening, and she didn't know if she was ready for whatever came next. They drove in silence for a while longer, the landscape shifting from trees to open fields, and then to a stretch of barren land. The car slowed, and the woman reached for something in the glove compartment. She pulled out a map, spreading it across her lap. We'll stop here, she said, her finger tracing a point on the map. We'll stay here for the night and regroup. Then, we'll figure out our next move. The girl peered over the woman's shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest. Stay here, she asked, unable to hide the fear in her voice. Is it safe? The man turned to look at her, his eyes serious. It will be for tonight. We'll set up a watch, Make sure nothing happens." The girl wanted to ask more questions, to demand more answers, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. They weren't giving her anything, not really. The silence in the car stretched on until the woman broke it again. "We're not the only ones out here," she said. "There's more to this than just you. More people involved." The girl blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. The woman's gaze softened, and she turned in her seat to face her. "There are people who want you, yes. But there are also people who are looking out for you. People who want to protect you, who've been tracking you for a long time." The girl's head spun. Who? Who are these people? The man in the front seat spoke this time. "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you're safe. For now, that's all you need to know." The girl swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She wasn't safe. Not really. She wasn't even sure who was keeping her safe anymore. The car came to a stop, and the man cut the engine. The silence was deafening. "Stay close," the woman said as she opened the door. The girl hesitated before getting out, her legs feeling weak beneath her. They were parked in a small clearing, surrounded by trees on all sides. The stars above were hidden behind the thick canopy, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. The woman and man moved quickly, setting up what looked like a camp, gathering equipment from the back of the car. The girl stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. She watched them work, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. They didn't speak much, their movements quick and efficient, as if they had done this 100 times before. The girl took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure if this was the right place, but for now, it was all she had. She took a step forward, moving toward the woman who was kneeling by a fire pit. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't look up. "Now we wait." The girl nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness around them. The night was still, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something watching them from the shadows. She wasn't safe yet. She wasn't sure she ever would be. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the only sounds the occasional rustling of leaves and the soft crackle of the small campfire the woman had started. The girl sat by the fire, her eyes darting nervously around the dark forest that surrounded them. She tried to focus on the warmth of the fire, but the fear and uncertainty gnawing at her wouldn't let her relax. The man and woman had been working quickly and efficiently, setting up their makeshift camp in the clearing, but the girl couldn't shake the feeling that they were still vulnerable, exposed. She could hear the wind picking up, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, but every time a branch cracked, her heart skipped a beat. It was as though something was out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. The man returned to the campfire, his eyes scanning the area, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his side. "We're not alone," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. The girl's heart raced. She turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman stood up, moving quickly toward the edge of the clearing. She peered into the darkness, her body tense, as though every muscle was on alert. "Stay close," the man warned. "Whatever happens, don't leave the fire." The girl's mind raced. Who was out there? Was it the people who had been chasing her? Or was it something else? She didn't know, but the fear that had been building in her chest suddenly felt very real. The woman turned back toward the campfire, her face grim. "We have to be ready," she said. "We don't know who's out there, but they're close. We need to move fast when the time comes." The girl nodded, though she didn't know what she was agreeing to. She didn't know what moving fast even meant in a situation like this. She was still just a kid, caught in the middle of something she couldn't understand. The man crouched down beside her, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice low. "You stayed calm. You listened. That's all we can ask for." The girl swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump in her throat. She wanted to ask why this was happening to her, why she was being pulled into this world of shadows and danger, but the words wouldn't come. The man stood up, his expression turning serious once again. "Stay close," he repeated, his voice harder now. "We don't know what's coming, but we're not running. Not yet." The woman stepped toward the campfire, holding a small flashlight. She switched it on, casting a beam of light into the trees. Her eyes flicked back and forth as if searching for something, some sign of movement in the dark. The girl's heart pounded as she watched her, her nerves on edge. What was happening? Why couldn't they just be safe for once? The man walked to the edge of the clearing, his footsteps soft on the ground. "I don't like this," he muttered under his breath. The woman didn't respond right away. She just continued to scan the shadows, her hand gripping the flashlight tightly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered the flashlight. "It's quiet. Too quiet," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I don't like this either." The girl's mind raced. What did that mean? Why wasn't it safe? Were they being watched? "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "We wait," he said simply. "But we stay alert. You stay close to the fire, and you don't move unless we say so." The girl nodded, though her stomach was in knots. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. The minutes felt like hours. The campfire crackled, sending small sparks into the night sky, but the darkness beyond the clearing felt endless. The wind continued to rustle through the trees, and the girl's thoughts began to race again. Was it just the wind? Was it someone coming closer? She had no way of knowing, but she felt like the air itself was charged with tension, like something was waiting to pounce. "Stay calm," the man said, his voice low but firm. He was standing now, his hand still on the knife at his side. "We'll get through this." The woman stepped closer to the fire, her expression hardening. "Keep your eyes open," she said, "and don't make a sound unless you have to." The girl nodded again, though her hands were shaking. She wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but she knew it wasn't the time. They had told her to stay close, to stay silent. She had to do what they said. The minutes dragged on, each second feeling like it was stretched to its breaking point. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the ground, and the girl's eyes darted nervously between the darkness and the people around her. What was out there? And how much longer would they have to wait before they could be sure they were safe? The stillness of the night was unbearable. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made the girl's heart race faster, the fear building inside her like a storm. She clutched the edge of her seat, trying to steady herself, but the tension in the air made it impossible to relax. The man and woman had been quiet for a while, their eyes darting around the clearing as if searching for something or someone. The girl felt her breath catch in her throat. Were they still being watched? Or was it all in her head? The woman stood up suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkness beyond the firelight. "Something's moving out there," she said quietly, but loud enough for the girl to hear. The man stood as well, his face serious as he reached for his weapon. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't move, don't make a sound." The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't want to be left alone. She wanted to go with them, to feel like she wasn't the only one in the dark, waiting for whatever danger lurked out there. But she couldn't protest. They had told her to stay by the fire, and that's exactly what she had to do. The woman and man moved quietly into the trees, their silhouettes barely visible in the night. The girl watched them disappear into the darkness, her fingers clenched tightly into fists. She was alone again, surrounded by nothing but the oppressive silence of the forest. Her mind raced. What was out there? Who was following them? Were they still coming for her? And what were they going to do if they found them? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement in the bushes. Her breath caught in her throat, and she froze, every muscle tensing. It was only a small animal, probably a rabbit or squirrel, scurrying through the underbrush, but in the stillness of the night, it sounded much louder. The girl exhaled slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. It wasn't them. It wasn't danger. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The minutes seemed to drag on, each second stretching into eternity. She glanced at the fire, watching the flames flicker in the wind, casting dancing shadows across the ground. The sound of the wind in the trees was the only thing that kept her company, but it didn't ease the fear gnawing at her. What if they never came back? What if they weren't able to protect her? What if they were all in danger? She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay still. She had to trust them. She had to trust that they knew what they were doing. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, and just as she thought she might lose her nerve, she saw movement. The man and woman were back. They emerged from the shadows, their faces hard, but their eyes scanning the area. "It's clear," the man said, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to go." The girl stood up immediately, relief flooding through her at the sight of them. She followed closely behind as they moved quickly back toward the car, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath their feet. They didn't say much, their expressions focused and grim. The girl's mind was spinning, still processing everything that had happened, but now wasn't the time for questions. The man opened the car door, ushering the girl inside. The woman got into the driver's seat, starting the engine. The headlights flashed on, illuminating the dark road ahead. "Where are we going?" the girl asked, her voice shaky as she sat down in the back seat. The man turned around slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "We're taking you to a place where you'll be safe," he said simply. "But we need to get there fast. Stay alert." The girl nodded, her hands gripping the seat beneath her. She wanted to ask more, but she knew now wasn't the time. She had to trust them, even if she didn't understand what was happening or why she was being targeted. The car began to move, speeding down the winding road. The headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the trees beside them. The girl looked out the window, her thoughts racing. They were still running. They were still moving. But where were they going? And what would happen when they finally stopped? The car made another sharp turn, and the girl's stomach lurched. They had been driving for what felt like hours, but the road still seemed endless. The trees grew denser, the air heavier, and for the first time, the girl felt a sense of dread creep up inside her. Where were they taking her? What had they promised? As the car continued to drive deeper into the unknown, the girl's thoughts drifted back to the moment she had been taken, to the shadowy figure that had whispered her name in the dark. She had never been more terrified in her life, but now, she had no choice but to hold on and hope that wherever they were going, it would be the safety they had promised her. The car's headlights pierced through the darkness as they continued down the winding road, the trees on both sides swaying in the cool night breeze. The girl sat in the back seat, her hands clutching the seat, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through her body, and every turn they made felt like it was taking her further away from the world she knew. She had no idea where they were going, or what awaited them at the end of this journey. The man and the woman in the front seats were silent, their faces set in expressions that betrayed no hint of what they were thinking. The car seemed to move faster as the minutes dragged on, the engine humming steadily, but the girl could barely focus on it. Her mind kept going back to that moment when she had been taken, to the fear that gripped her when she had first heard her name whispered in the dark. Who had been watching her? Why had they come for her? And why was she the one caught in the middle of all of this? "We'll be there soon," the man said, his voice low but calm. The girl barely nodded, her throat dry as she tried to force back the wave of fear threatening to rise within her. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know what was really going on, but she kept quiet. The silence in the car was suffocating, and the only sound was the steady hum of the tires on the road. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed, and the headlights illuminated a small building in the distance. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, the light from the headlights casting long shadows on the ground. The woman glanced over her shoulder, meeting the girl's eyes. "We're almost there," she said, her voice almost reassuring. The girl nodded, her heart racing. This place, this building, was at the end of the road? Was this where she would finally be safe? The car came to a stop in front of the building, and the man quickly got out, his eyes scanning the surroundings before looking back at the girl. "Stay in the car," he instructed, his tone serious. The girl wanted to protest, to go with them, but she held her tongue. She didn't know what was out there, but she could feel the tension in the air. She watched as the woman and man moved toward the building, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Her gaze never left them as they disappeared inside. The door to the building creaked open, and the girl held her breath, waiting for something to happen. She sat there, staring at the empty road ahead, her mind racing, every sound making her jump. Minutes passed. It felt like hours. Finally, the man came back to the car, his face hard, his expression unreadable. He opened the door and slipped back into the driver's seat. The woman followed, her eyes darting around the area before she got in. "It's safe for now," the man said, his voice low. "But we need to move quickly. We can't stay here for long." The girl nodded again, her stomach churning with uncertainty. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew one thing. Nothing was simple. The woman started the car, and they pulled away from the building, the headlights cutting through the darkness once again. "Where are we going now?" the girl asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "We're taking you to a secure location," he said, his tone clipped. "You'll be safer there." The girl swallowed, but she didn't know how to feel. She was being moved again, from one unknown place to the next. It felt like she was in a constant state of running. But from what? Who was after her? And what would happen when they finally caught up? The car continued its steady progress down the road, the silence between them heavy, filled with questions that none of them seemed willing to answer. The girl pressed her back against the seat, her hands still clenched tightly in her lap. The fear gnawed at her, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to trust that they knew what they were doing. But the uncertainty was overwhelming. As the minutes passed, the girl tried to push her thoughts aside, to focus on the road ahead. She couldn't let herself think about everything that had happened, about everything that was still to come. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. And yet, as the car drove deeper into the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that they were still being followed, still being hunted. Her heart raced faster, but she forced herself to stay still, to wait, to trust them. For now, that was all she could do. The car's headlights cut through the darkness as they drove deeper into the unknown, the trees around them thinning out into an open field. The girl sat in the back seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the seat, staring out the window. The road ahead seemed endless, and the night stretched on forever. The man and woman in the front were silent, both focused on the road, their faces grim. The girl tried to steady her breath, but her thoughts were racing. She still didn't understand why this was happening to her, why she was caught up in a world of danger and shadows. Every time she thought she might have a grasp on the situation, something else happened, and she was left lost and confused again. "We're getting close," the man finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it, like he was constantly on alert. The girl glanced up at him through the rearview mirror, her heart pounding. "Close to what?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost lost in the hum of the engine. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward the woman, who looked back at him with a nod, as if they were communicating silently. "To where we'll be safe," the woman said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made the girl uneasy. "Just a little longer." The girl nodded, though she didn't feel reassured. She still didn't know where they were going or what kind of safety awaited her. Her mind was too full of questions, too many questions without answers. "Why are they after me?" she asked, her voice small but desperate. She had to know. The man's jaw tightened slightly, his grip on the steering wheel firm. "You'll understand when we get there," he said, his tone final, like he wasn't going to answer her any further. The girl's heart sank. She didn't want to wait anymore. She didn't want to live in the dark, wondering what was going on and why. She wanted to know now, but she could tell by the man's expression that pressing him further wouldn't get her anywhere. Instead, she turned her attention back to the road, the only thing she had control over in this moment. The car continued its steady pace down the dark road, and the girl tried to breathe through the rising panic in her chest. The headlights illuminated more trees, more open spaces, but she still couldn't see where they were headed. It was like they were driving to nowhere. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman turned in her seat, looking back at her. "Not long now," she said, but the way her eyes flicked to the side made the girl uneasy. "We'll be there soon." The silence in the car stretched again. The girl could feel her nerves tightening, her mind racing. She didn't know what kind of safe place they were talking about, but she was starting to doubt whether it would be enough. The people chasing her were relentless, and there was no guarantee that running would solve anything. The man slowed the car as they came to a turn, the tires crunching over gravel. The headlights bounced over the uneven road, and the girl felt a shift in the air. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination, but everything felt different now. The road had changed, the trees were thinner, and the surroundings seemed even more remote. The woman tensed beside the man, her eyes scanning the area. "We need to be careful," she said, her voice low. The girl's stomach tightened. She wanted to ask why, what was happening, but she didn't dare interrupt. The car continued to roll forward, slower now, like they were approaching something important. And then, in the distance, the girl saw it. A house. It was small, isolated, and barely visible in the dark, but it stood out against the dark backdrop of the night. It didn't look like much, but it was something. The man turned to the woman. "We'll stop here," he said. The woman nodded, and the car slowed even more. The headlights of the car bathed the house in light, revealing a modest, old farmhouse that looked abandoned. The girl felt a mix of emotions swirl inside her: relief, fear, confusion. She didn't know what to expect next, but she couldn't stop herself from feeling like they had finally arrived at a place of safety. The man parked the car in front of the house, and the woman immediately opened the door, stepping out. The man followed her, his eyes still scanning the surroundings. "Stay in the car," he instructed the girl. She hesitated but nodded, unsure of what else to do. The woman approached the house first, her movements cautious but quick. The man followed close behind, and the girl watched them disappear into the shadows of the house. Her heart raced. Was this it? Was this where they would hide from whatever dangers were hunting her? She sat alone in the car, the silence enveloping her. She couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into a trap, if they were being watched. Her fingers gripped the seat, the uncertainty gnawing at her. She wanted to go with them, to know what was happening, but for now, she was stuck waiting in the dark. After what felt like forever, the door to the house creaked open again, and the man and woman returned. The woman was the first to speak. "It's safe for now," she said, her voice firm. The man glanced around before opening the car door. "Come on," he said. "We'll stay here for the night." The girl got out of the car, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She followed the man and woman into the house, her mind racing with questions. What was waiting for her here? Would this really be the safe place they had promised her? The house seemed too quiet, too empty, but for now, it was all she had. The woman and man led her to a small room with a bed and a window. The girl stood there, staring at the unfamiliar surroundings, still unsure of what to believe. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but for now, she had to trust them. She had no choice. The small room was dimly lit, the soft glow from a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The girl stood by the bed, her body feeling heavy with exhaustion, but her mind was still racing. She had been through so much, yet the fear and uncertainty still clung to her. She wanted to believe that this place, this house, was the safe haven they promised, but every part of her screamed that nothing was ever truly safe. The woman and the man had left her alone for a moment, saying they needed to make a few more preparations, but the girl couldn't help but feel a growing unease. The night had fallen completely now, the silence outside broken only by the occasional rustle of wind. The girl walked over to the small window, peering out into the darkness. The trees outside seemed to close in on the house, their shadows stretching across the land like fingers reaching for her. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, her breath fogging up the window. She felt trapped. But what else could she do? She didn't have anywhere else to go, and for now, these people were her only hope. Her eyes wandered back to the door, waiting for the man and woman to return. She still had so many questions. Who was after her? Why? And why was it so important for her to be hidden away in this remote place? Her thoughts were interrupted by a creaking sound from the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, listening intently. The door opened slowly, and the man stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a moment before walking over to the bed and sitting down, rubbing his face tiredly. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice low. The girl nodded, though she didn't feel okay. She didn't know how to explain the fear still coursing through her, the feeling that everything was just the calm before a storm. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm just scared." The man looked at her, his gaze softening. "That's normal," he said. "But you're safe here. For now, that's all we can give you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But there's more we need to discuss. The people after you, they're still out there, and they're getting closer. We can't stay here for long." The girl's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I thought we were safe here." "We are, for now," the man said, his eyes meeting hers. "But this place isn't the end of the road. We're going to need to keep moving, keep hiding, until we know it's safe." The girl sat down on the bed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I don't understand. Why are they after me? What do they want with me?" The man's expression hardened, and he glanced away for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "I can't explain everything right now. Not yet. But you'll understand soon enough. What I can tell you is this: they know you're here, and they won't stop until they find you." That's why we need to keep moving. We need to stay one step ahead. The girl felt a lump form in her throat, her chest tightening with anxiety. What if we don't? She asked, her voice shaking. What happens then? The man didn't respond right away. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air between them. Then they'll find us, he said quietly, and we won't be able to protect you. The words hit the girl like a ton of bricks. She felt a chill run through her. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. She was just a kid. How was she supposed to survive in a world like this? The man stood up slowly, his expression shifting back to the calm, controlled demeanor he had when he first arrived. We need to get you out of here before sunrise, he said, his tone firm. There's a safe house about 3 hours from here. We'll move out first thing in the morning. Stay close, and don't make a sound when we leave. The girl nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. 3 hours. That wasn't long at all. She didn't know if she was ready for this, if she would ever be ready, but she had no choice. She couldn't stay here forever. What about them? She asked. The people after me? The man met her gaze, his eyes filled with resolve. We'll deal with them, he said simply. The woman entered the room just then, her face serious but calm. We're ready, she said. Let's move. The girl stood up, her legs weak but determined. She knew that running was all she could do. She had to survive, to find safety, no matter the cost. The woman and the man led her out of the room, their footsteps steady, and they moved quickly through the dark house, their shadows long and stretched by the faint light of the moon. The girl's heart raced, but she followed them closely, keeping her head down, not daring to make a sound. They reached the door, and the man opened it carefully, glancing outside to make sure the coast was clear. The night air hit the girl's face as they stepped outside, the cold wind rushing past her. The woman and man moved with purpose, and the girl followed, her breath visible in the chill night air. They were leaving the only place that had felt safe, heading into the unknown once again. But this time, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep her going.